Ren from Hallowed Be Thy Game, and today I'm going to be sharing with you all my thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII Remake story. Let's check it out. Now, before I get into this today, I do want to give another fair bit of warning. I'm going to speak unfiltered about the story spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Remake and the Integrate DLC. I'm really hyped to go kind of all in on this, and I mostly want to make this video today to catalog my thoughts in video form on the story spoilers from Final Fantasy VII Remake and the DLC. And be able to look back when part 2 comes out and all the other entries to see, was I right? Were we right? And as a community and kind of see where the story's going from here. Again, I want to say I loved VII Remake. It really hit the nostalgia and magical feel that I felt when I first played it all the way back in, sophomore year of high school. And I freaking loved it. But I will admit, I can see why a lot of people had mixed feelings on it. I think the thing that a lot of people struggled with the most is, it's such a beloved story and tale. The title is misleading. Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you've played and beat it and you kind of see all the plot threads that are going on and you play the DLC, you begin to realize that Remake is not a lie, but it is misleading. And I think that a lot of people can feel a bait and switch with that. But for anybody who's played it, you know that Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't a true remake of the original game, but it's rather Sephiroth remaking the first game as a sequel to Advent Children. That realization kind of blew my mind, and there's a lot of feelings that I had to process. And one of the big things right off the bat that kind of hits you as you're playing the game and you're a big fan is the plot ghosts. In the end, I didn't mind the plot ghosts, but I didn't like the way they were implemented. They felt a little heavy-handed and in your face. But kind of the realization I had when I was playing the game, and I realized that they weren't necessarily changing the story, but they were trying to keep the timeline the same. And then you start realizing Sephiroth is popping up a heck of a lot sooner than he did in the original game. And, if you're like me and you haven't played the original game in years again, then, you kind of like, wait, is this really how it happened? And, I really should have replayed the original right before I played this, but I didn't. And really just kind of that realization that there's a lot more to this game than just what lies skin deep. I think with Square, it can be, and kind of JRPGs in general, a lot of times you can be like, oh, please don't make this complicated for complicated's sake. But I really feel that looking back over the game and kind of reading up all the theories and what the community's thinking, it's pretty mind-blowing where the story could be heading from here. And especially if after you beat it, you realize that it is essentially a continuation of the story, you start to wonder like, holy crap, what could be in store for us? And so I was just really mind-blown that Sephiroth is actually trying to change the original timeline. Now, I do want to nerd out a little bit about the Yuffie DLC 2 and spoilers for it, but I was so hyped at the potential that Zack is for sure alive. And, at the end of VII Remake, we see there right as they're leaving Midgar that Zack lives. And back when, he sacrificed his life to save Cloud from Crisis Core in the original story. And I'm like, holy crap, are they in different timelines? Is this different universes? Is this the same timeline, but just set a couple months apart? My mind honestly just began to short wire, and I'm like, holy crap, could we be leading to a moment where Zack and Cloud team up? And then I started wondering, throughout the story, as you kind of see like, oh, Biggs didn't die. Wedge is probably dead, but maybe not. Is Jesse alive? Holy crap, my mind is just like trying to cope with all these things. But then I had this terrible thought, and I want to share with you my immediate feeling after playing Remake. I was like, oh my god, is Aerith not going to die? And if Aerith doesn't die, does that mean Tifa might die? And like, my blood ran cold. I was just like, oh my God, oh no, please God, because I'm a Tifa shipper, okay? Like Tifa my girl, okay? And I mean, Tifa is my favorite female hero from JRPGs. Like, she's friggin' awesome. I love her. And the remake just really clenched her and Aerith's characterization, and I loved it. It was so good. But I'll be honest, my initial gut feeling was, oh my God, is Tifa gonna die? And I started listening to like different spoiler chats, and I started looking at different areas where people go. And I will say this, after kind of taking multiple months to kind of process all the information, I do agree that I think the major story points of Final Fantasy VII original story is going to continue to happen. I think major plot threads will continue to happen with some slight changes along the way to give us hope. But really, Sephiroth's entire purpose right now is just to inflict despair. And I really feel that him and Cloud, he's giving Cloud hope right now that potentially he could change something, because Cloud's seeing these visions and Cloud's kind of getting hope. And, he's going to see a lot of horrible things and think, man, I can maybe change that. Biggs didn't die. And then maybe Cloud will think he can save Aerith, but turns out to not be the case, and she still dies. And that gut-wrenching despair will just hit us. Because as a fan, one of the worst kept secrets in gaming is that Aerith dies in Final Fantasy VII Original. And it's really the cornerstone of everyone's connection and emotional upheaval that kind of clinched it as one of their favorite and more defining games of their childhood. But it's kind of like that Darth Vader is Luke's father. It's such an iconic, well-known event that essentially there's no getting around that people are expecting this to happen. But if they give us hope that we can stop it, then I believe that the original developers are creating an atmosphere of hope that we can save Aerith. And that's what I feel like a lot of fans are kind of thinking about is, okay, if this can change, then can we change something for the good? Or can something else change for the worst? And something I honestly learned that I didn't even realize about the original Final Fantasy VII is that the scene that we see at the very end with Red 13 and his children is essentially a world without humans. And that to me is interesting, that essentially the creators of Final Fantasy VII have always kind of left the door open and essentially stated that, we necessarily didn't win at the end of the original game. And that to me is fascinating. Now, I'm interested to see where we go from here, because in the VII Remake, Red 13, after seeing that exact same vision, states that that's what happens if we lose here today. And we didn't lose. So there is definitely some changing for the better, and this is truly a sequel to Advent Children and a continuation of the story. And I'll be honest, I'm on board. I'm friggin' ready to see what happens. I am ravenous. And at the end of the Yuffie DLC, we see that Zack gets back to Midgar and he goes to Aerith's church and she's not there, but there's other people there, and a lot of speculation, and I'm curious too, is I initially saw that scene as he's gotten to it after the plate's fallen and Aerith's not there and everybody's there weeping. But that doesn't make a lot of sense. I feel like if Zack was getting back to that church at the time after the plate falls, like time has finally realigned and Zack is in the exact same time and date as the party at the end of VII Remake, I feel like he is in the past, and I'm curious to see if the Biggs that we saw with Jesse's glove and essentially teasing that Jesse might still be alive, could we be looking at them partying up in a different timeline with Zack in a similar situation to what we see in Final Fantasy VIII with, Squall and Laguna, the two different parties? I think I'm saying that right. It's been a long freaking time since I've played VIII. But I'm curious to see what the dynamic could be. And heading into Remake Part 2, and, we see at the end of the Yuffie DLC that Cloud and the gang are making it to Calm. And, we know Yuffie is going to be not too far away from joining them. I'm curious to see, does this become more of an open world RPG? I'm really stoked to see what this development team and these story writers can do with the capability of the PS5 mixed with the kind of story setup we have from VII Remake. For me personally, I am all in. I cannot get enough of this. I am fascinated by it. I mean, heck, I'm making a spoiler discussion, story discussion, which is very rare on this channel. But I'm really psyched to see where it goes. Now, I have not played like Dirge Cerberus or like the ancillary games. I've really only ever played VII Remake, Crisis Core, and Advent Children, and I've kind of read up on everything else because from what I've seen of Dirge Cerberus, I'm okay. I really don't want to taint with my pure love and unfiltered joy with the Final Fantasy VII story and cast. There's a lot of potential here to see where we go, and really playing with our expectations in a good way, in a way that doesn't feel extremely forced, but rather ties in, a lot of Advent Children, but it kind of takes the good potential Advent Children had, and essentially, for me, Advent Children just had really cool fight scenes and some epic moments, but overall, I've only seen it like twice since it came out. I'm really happy that it does feel like the story is on such a grander, epic scale, and that when Sephiroth is on screen, you can cut the tension with a knife. It is palpable. And really going from here, like, what else can we expect? And I can't wait to see the gang get to Bugenhagen and kind of learn more about the story and where we're kind of going from here, try to put some of these pieces together, and really just tackle the rest of the story. Hype levels are at 11 for me. I think the important thing to state here is that I do trust the Final Fantasy VII Remake story writers right now, and I can't wait to see if Zack and Cloud meet. What does this 7 seconds mean? There's a lot of unanswered questions that I don't really have enough information or enough knowledge on the deeper lore of the ancillary properties to know if there is a clear meaning or a clear reference in 7 seconds that Sephiroth says to Cloud at the end. Right now, the major questions are at the forefront of my mind heading into Remake Part 2 is where's Aerith in Zack's timeline? Is she dead? Did she die already? Or is she just missing with the party? What's happening here? Does Shinra have her? I mean, what is Zack, Biggs, and I'm assuming Jesse going to do this? And I really hope Wedge is alive. God, I freaking love Wedge. And his voice actor just crushed it. I mean, like, my childlike wonder in my mind, I mean, that's how Wedge sounded. And he did such a good job. I would love to get more of him somehow. If we have Biggs and Jesse alive, why not make sure Wedge lives somehow? Would be interested to see how that was done, because it looked pretty hopeless, I'm not gonna lie. But hey, my theory is if you did not see them actually die in a JRPG, then they're probably still alive. Now, one interesting tidbit that I found out from spoiler discussions and reading online is a lot of the community thinks that the shadows that we fight at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, instead of us naturally assuming it was Cloud, Barret, and I want to say Tifa, they're the shadow triplets from Advent Children. Kadaj, I think one of their names is. And that was fascinating to me. And you can't ignore the connection that Advent Children has. And that was kind of like some pretty deep story writing that I did not expect from Square Enix, if I'm going to be honest. And it was a really nice surprise to see how deep they've taken these story threads. Because one criticism I can't have of JRPGs is just kind of pulling something out of your butt. Like, well, there's just this shadow dimension demon from, an alternate timeline, and they got here through blah, blah, blah. Something weird. So for them to actually show some clear story threads that aren't subtly stated, that to me is excellent. And a lot of the character dialogue we have between Cloud and Tifa, it feels natural. It feels real. I mean, you can almost swim in the passion and nostalgia. It's excellent. And to think of what they could do with some of these major moments, like Cloud losing Aerith, Zack maybe losing Aerith. God, I mean, I don't know if I'm ready for those feels, because in the Yuffie DLC, when Sonnen dies, that is devastating. And I know a lot of people probably didn't care too much about that, but kind of given my personal history and his connection he had to his late sister, that hit me on a guttural level. And that was the Yuffie DLC. Like, we only knew this character for like 7 hours, and they were able to build a character arc for Yuffie, which who knew that could be done. And they were able to kind of hit me in the feels so hard, and they kind of drew a tear for me. Imagine what they could do with Aerith's death. Oh my god. And please, for the love of God, don't let Tifa die. Oh my god, I couldn't handle it. Anyways, I do feel that ultimately Aerith is going to sacrifice herself again, because it's pretty clear from all the story threads, Aerith knows what's going on. I don't know if the live stream or the planet has communed with her and kind of let her know, but she does appear as the game goes on to be more cognizant of the grander picture. I don't know what to level or depth, but I think Aerith will know she needs to die. Make sure everything goes correctly and everything kind of continues in place. That's my feeling. That's my gut feeling. I'm interested to see what actually happens, because I do feel that Aerith is such a famously tragic character, that they wouldn't mess with that character's integrity. I mean, her death is so integral to the story, and I feel like her kind of ascending above just a mortal existence is what's going to be necessary to stop Sephiroth, because right now I'm assuming we're fighting, a disembodied Sephiroth, his mimetic legacy, I'm probably saying that wrong, and how he is connected and consensually materialize himself from anything that has Genova cells. So, and that's why he has such a deep, like, guttural level impact on Cloud. So pretty fascinating there. VII Remake took the time to kind of build these characters that we've kind of established a headcanon for and kind of read between the lines with ancillary character development, Clouds and Kingdom Hearts, Clouds and this and that. But I love that the story writers essentially went back to the 90s and said, this is how the characters were when we wrote them originally, and then they developed them from there. So Cloud showing signs of PTSD, essentially growing and being a little bit more emotionally open than he probably originally was interpreted by fans, it resonated with me. And the character development we get from Barrett as a father and Tifa as just this kind of a good person in a bad situation, those moments of development were so excellent and they landed so well. I really cannot state this enough. I cannot wait to see where we go from here. But what about you? Do you have any theories on the story, or what were your thoughts on the story for Final Fantasy VII Remake and the Yuffie DLC? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you all so much for kind of letting me just kind of sound off my thoughts on all of the VII Remake story and such. I'm not going to say this is going to be my last video on the VII Remake story. If I remember something I missed that is pretty obvious, I'm sure I'll revisit it in a future video. So thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to reading your comments. And thanks again for subscribing. As of right now, we're coming up on 1,000 subs, and it's really exciting, and it's been just such an honor and privilege to be able to nerd out with you all in these videos. And until then, I'll see you all next time.